Weather impacts every outdoor garden, but the impacts of heat or cold, rain or snow, wind or hail will vary based on climate, time of year, and the characteristics of each unique garden. But we as gardeners can fight back. Join me today as I share with you how I protect my plants from weather. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and in my Colorado garden I am exposed to many extremes of weather, from frigid temperatures in winter and the possibility of inches and inches of snow to stifling heat in the summer with extremely low humidity and gale force winds from the thunderstorms that'll roll through and also drop golf ball size hail. These extremes I've learned to deal with. I've learned how to protect my plants. And while you may not have the same type of weather patterns I have, the way we protect our plants is going to be the same. Problems arise when those impacts of weather can directly influence the growth of our plants. And so the solution is pretty simple. We put a barrier between our plants and the weather. And I'll show you a number of different ways I do that throughout the growing season. A classic way for gardeners to combat the weather impact is with a greenhouse. All over the world, gardeners in cold regions are growing plants in a greenhouse that wouldn't otherwise survive. In very wet climates, a greenhouse can stay drier. In very dry climates, a greenhouse adds extra humidity. In a very windy and challenging environment like mine, a greenhouse can protect my young plants from the cold of spring and particularly the winds that might damage them. I know that a greenhouse is on the wish list of many gardeners. It isn't necessary, and I'll show you the other ways that I've been dealing with weather for more than 30 years because this is the first year that I've had a greenhouse, and I'm already noticing the positive benefits. This year, spring was colder than usual, and none of us can remember the prolonged days of excessive wind that we've been encountering for a couple months now. Those weather conditions are not conducive to hardening off the plants that need to go into my garden. So this greenhouse was a lifesaver for me. I've been able to harden off all my peppers and tomatoes, and as soon as my soil temperature is warm enough, they'll be able to go outside because they're hardened off. They're ready to go, and this greenhouse has protected them during this last part of spring before they go into the ground. A greenhouse as a weather protector is really hard to beat. But you don't have to have a greenhouse to protect your plants. And the way I've been protecting my plants for these many decades without a greenhouse is with hoops. Hoops of different sizes that I can put over my plants and then offer the same type of protection that they might get from a greenhouse. In the cool days of spring and again in autumn, I can put plastic over my hoops and then secure them just using spring clamps and give these plants a couple extra degrees of protection. Just like a greenhouse would, this plastic can keep the air inside nice and warm. And this plastic can combat a number of other harmful weather effects. It's very effective at blocking the wind. In strong wind conditions, anchored to a hoop, the plants inside will be protected. In very rainy environments, plastic that's completely draped over a bed like this can shed away the extra rain. And for regions like mine that get thunderstorms that not only drop a lot of rain, but that heavy hail, well, this thick plastic can fight back the hail as well. I really like the use of hoops, of different sizes using different coverings to combat my weather. Now, the plastic is just the first way that I'll fight back some of the harmful effects. On sunny days, the temperature underneath plastic can get quite hot and it needs to be removed. So as my days begin warming in spring, I'll often transition to a row cover. This is a woven fabric that's usually used to keep insects away from eating the seedlings, but I use it for weather control. It's pretty effective at stopping damage from heavy winds. And I look at this, I can see a little bit of damage from some of the hailstorms that this cloth has encountered, but it's kept the hail away from my plants. And it offers a little bit of shade. So I tend to transition from winter to summer. Today, it's supposed to be 90 degrees Fahrenheit. This extra little bit of shade protection can help the seedlings growing underneath. As the temperatures get even hotter, I turn to shade cloth. During the peak of summer, shade cloth may be necessary to protect your plants. Right now, I've got seeds that I recently sowed in this bed. And in my low humidity, the soil can dry out pretty quickly. Right now, I'm watering at least 3 times a day to keep the soil moist. The plants aren't growing yet, but the shade cloth is reducing the amount of water I need. It's cutting down on the evaporation of the water from the soil. I'll leave it in place as these young plants begin growing because my days will warm up quickly and I don't want these little seedlings baked by a hot sun. And as you've probably guessed, the shade cloth does a great job of protecting my plants from hail. It may seem like I'm focusing a lot on hail, and that's because in my garden, hail has probably the biggest impact, figuratively and literally. I've lost entire harvests from hailstorms. I've had my garden flattened by hail. So for me, it is a primary focus. You need to figure out that primary focus for your garden as well, because it will probably influence how you garden in the future. Some of these plants, like garlic, can handle a hailstorm. And 2 days ago, we had our first big hail. Well, you can see by the size of these stones, the garlic may be able to withstand a storm like this, but other little plants, the rest of the garden, might not be able to. We want to put a barrier between the severe weather and our plants. And even something as simple as garden pots might be a quick solution. Shortly after planting these eggplants, we had a real quick hailstorm with some pretty good size hail. But these extra pots were enough to protect the plants. The hail might come back, so I'm going to leave the covers on. Hail is such a concern for me that I designed and built this entire garden area so that it could be protected from hail by this single large hail cloth. And so now every year I unroll this out, cover this area, and it's protected for the entire season. Last year was the first year that I used this, and we only had one storm that would have been devastating to my garden. In fact, it flattened some of the beds that I didn't have protection on, but every plant underneath this cloth was protected and came through just fine. Sometimes you need to make big changes in how you design and build your gardens just to protect them from the weather that is the biggest concern. With a large area like that, I found it best to just cover the whole thing and leave it covered. But for my individual beds, I just leave the hoops in place and then swap out the pieces as I need them. And all of these different fabrics are cut to size. They're in my shed, and if a storm threatens, I pull them out. Or if I'm protecting my plants in spring, I pull them out and leave them in place for a few weeks. It all depends on the weather I'm protecting and the size of the beds. And I do the same thing with some of my container gardening. I love my greenstock vertical planters, but they and all other container plants are susceptible to the same devastating weather that the rest of the garden might see. I like that greenstock actually makes covers for the vertical tower. This frost protection is great if we have a cold snap that hits when the plants are just starting to grow. Or, as I saw recently with that hailstorm, in a pinch, I can run out and cover the green stalks. Not every plant will require the same type of weather protection. I don't worry at all about my garlic. It can handle the full sun and the hail that might result from a windy thunderstorm. But I want to protect my cucumbers and squashes that would be exposed to those same conditions. The tomatoes that are growing underneath this hoop, that little bit of shade and the protection from the trellis may be all they need during those hot summer days. I like the hoops. I like the pre-cut pieces. I like the ease of being able to swap out the different type of weather protections I need. For me, it's a variable system that changes over the course of the growing season. And I like that using these kind of weather protection methods, at the end of the season, I can get a harvest because my plants are still alive. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.